Hello, my name is Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm the publisher of Irish Environment. This is the first in a series of conversations on environmental matters on the island of Ireland. And we're very pleased and proud on the first conversation to have Frank McDonald, environment editor from the Irish Times.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Frank.
Thank you very much.
Frank, could you give the audience a sense of your background, where you went to school and what your career path was?
Well, I suppose I grew up in the era of thrift and waste not, want not, and make, do and mend. And I went to school in Glasnevin, in a Christian Brothers school, very severe on occasion. Yes. And then went to UCD and did an arts degree in history and politics. Nothing to do with architecture or the environment or anything else like that. I mean, the environment hardly rated at the time, except for protests over the demolition of Georgian buildings in the centre of Dublin, particularly in St. Stephen's Green. The big controversy in Hume Street was happening at the time when I was at college. And then after graduating in 1971, I went to New York and worked for 2 years there as a freelance correspondent for the Irish Press, because I'd been involved in student journalism. And then about 2 years later, they offered me a job in Dublin as a sub-editor. I didn't even know what a sub-editor was at the time. But I came back and learned how to process copy, as it was called, in the good old days of typewriters, banging away. And it was during the course of that period that I realized that the city that I knew really well, because my parents were great at bringing us around to places like Dublin Castle and Christchurch and St. Patrick's and all of the other major things in the city, Dún Laoghaire Harbour, the beaches in Portmarnock and Donabate, for example, the Bull Island, all of these places we got to know, Howth, the Howth Peninsula and so on, and Killiney, of course. And I just began to realise that the city that I grew up in was being whittled away, and there were derelict sites everywhere. And I began writing about it, about what was going on. And I reckoned at the time that there was a story behind every hoarding, the most widespread plant in Dublin at the time was Buddleia, which grows rampant on derelict sites. So it was a city of Buddleia then. Now, of course, this was providing a kind of a wildlife habitat of sorts for flying insects, but nonetheless, it was a symbol of decay. And so when I joined the Irish Times in 1979, I did a series of articles called Dublin, What Went Wrong? And it documented what was happening to the city. And it was a combination of property speculation, the hoarding of land, and also these dreadful plans that the city council's road engineers had, basically to level the streets. Demolish everything on both sides of the Liffey Quays, for example. Everything was to go in order to create 6-lane freeways, essentially, for motorised traffic from the suburbs, because at that stage the inner city was being depopulated, and people were moving out to the suburbs, and certainly everybody who made decisions about the city were living out in the suburbs. So the inner city became fair game for both property speculation and insane road planning of a type that had been abandoned by that stage in most European cities. And I had travelled quite a bit in Europe and also in the United States. I mean, I'd seen the disaster that is Houston, Texas, for example. I'd seen the phenomenon of the donut in the United States. And I suppose I felt that there had to be, the city had to have a heart, and it had to have a living heart. And there were a lot of other people at the time who felt the same way, like Deirdre Kelly, the late Deirdre Kelly, who founded the Living City Group, Kevin B. Nolan in the Dublin Civic Group. They were not only anxious to preserve Georgian buildings, but to have people living in town. So that became a bit of a campaign, really, that I waged over the years.
And that was the basis for your first book, The Destruction of Dublin?
That's right, yeah, that's right. That came out in 1985. I mean, I never thought of writing a book, to be honest. I mean, it never entered my head, but Fergal Tobin from Gale and Macmillan got on to me and said, would you write a book about the destruction of Dublin? And of course, that's what it was called, the Destruction of Dublin. And it was a real muckraker's book, you know. I mean, it really dished the dirt, you know.
You're not shy at pulling punches.
No, I was an angry young man at that stage, and I was really pissed off about the way the city had been devalued, the way it had been abused, and so I was anxious to, in a way, put on record who had done this, you know. I mean, names, people, and you know, architects, lawyers, property developers, roads engineers, you know, you know, there was auctioneers, estate agents, you know, it was a rogues gallery now, really. And what had gone on essentially since the late 1950s, when the city was intact until that point, because don't forget that apart from the German bombs that fell supposedly accidentally on the North Strand, Dublin had escaped, unlike many other cities. It had escaped the horrors of the Second World War. So all of the damage that has happened since then, we've done ourselves.
Now, then that was followed by a series of books on the city.
Well, there were, you know, I did another one in 1989 called Saving the City, which was a follower-upper, as it were, to the destruction of Dublin. And then later on in 2000, I did another book called The Construction of Dublin. And in a way, that was a kind of a metaphorical title, in a sense, because it wasn't just about the physical construction of the city, but it was about what kind of Dublin was being built, you know, and what did we mean by Dublin? Because at that stage, even then, you know, in the late 1990s, when I was working on that, you know, it was quite obvious that the city was undergoing a process of Los Angelization, where the sprawl, you know, instead of, I mean, God be with the days when we used to think that Lucan and Leixlip were far away. Now they were building bits of Dublin in Rochford Bridge in County Westmeath and in Gorey in County Wexford, both of which are 50 miles or 80 kilometres from the centre of Dublin. So, you know, there was this extraordinary thing going on that, and nobody was really talking about that at the time. It was the creation of this enormous commuter belt that now extends out 60, 70 kilometres, 80 kilometres, even 100 kilometres from the city, and not just in Leinster, but even in Ulster, in the Ulster counties of Cavan and Monaghan, has been absorbed into Dublin too. You know. Now,
when you became the environment editor in 2000, sorry, you became the environment.
I became environment correspondent in, I think it was in 1985. So I've been at it a long time.
And then
I became environment editor in 2000. Yeah.
Okay. And
so I've been doing that since.
And a lot of that comes out of that interest in the city and the protection of the city.
Absolutely. And then of course, inevitably the wider issues. You know, like issues to do with, for example, you know, well, traffic and transport. Also waste management. And then ultimately, of course, the biggest issue of all, which is climate change.
Yes.
You know.
And I want to come back to that at the end, because that's obviously the critical issue. But what led you to be a journalist? You were in history and politics, but you were the editor of the student paper, right?
That's
called
right.
The Student.
Yeah,
Funny
that's
enough.
right. Yeah, that's right.
And what led you to news as opposed to some other politics or?
Well, I mean, when I went to college, I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, I literally had no idea. If you're doing an arts degree, you could be anything. You know, you could end up as anything. I knew that I didn't want to teach because I probably wouldn't have had the patience to do that. And I drifted into student politics and also into student journalism, and realised this was something I could do, and I really enjoyed it. And that's how I became a journalist. You know, I didn't go through any degree course in journalism or anything like that. I still can only type with two fingers. But you know, I don't think I could do anything else.
Was it the writing in part, or the investigation and being on the street? Was all that combination?
It was, yeah. There was, and also the fact that, you know, we had a really inspiring English teacher in St. Vincent's in Glasnevin, Bob Eager, who used to live in Dartmouth Square and used to walk to Glasnevin to work every day. And he was a great, passionate teacher of English. And I think I owe my love of the language to him. In a way.